With the second pick in the 2020 NFL Draft, the Washington Redskins select Chase Young, defensive end, Ohio State.
But you know as they say, hail to the Redskins. Let's roll, man. Let's go.
Welcome, all my fellow Redskin brethren and sistren. I am your man and resident Redskins fan, Lou. Thank you for joining me here on the Redskins Report. So, this is something that I generally don't do, okay? Because of these unique set of circumstances and these unique times, I'm going to actually do it this year because I actually feel one of these guys is going to make this football team. It almost feels like a lock that he's going to make the football team. Now, we'll see what happens. Injuries happen, and he may come in and be outperformed by some of the guys already on the roster. And so there's a chance he could not make this roster. But normally, I don't do videos on UDFAs. And just in case you're wondering, undrafted free agents. You generally don't do videos on these guys because they don't make the football team. They don't crack the roster. All right. Now, sometimes you have outliers and guys that make the football team. Like last year, we had a UDFA make the team in Steven Sims Jr. And he seems to be a contributor that we're going to be relying on moving forward. We like his talent. Think that this guy has potential upside in this league. And he showed us flashes last year. And so he's a guy that we're going to probably rock with moving forward. And we've seen guys blow up in this league that were undrafted rookie free agents. Similar to the one in Denver in Phillip Lindsay, who is becoming a star in this league at the running back position. It happens, but it's rare. And so I generally don't do videos on these guys because I don't expect them to be around for very much longer than training camp. And so I know some of you get really excited. Man, did you check out this? This guy's got a chance to make the football team. And you get so fixated on these undrafted guys. And I'm telling you, don't do it. Okay, we see them come and go every year. Don't do it. But this year is a little unique because of the fact that this is a new coaching staff and new philosophies, new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator. There are some roster spots available. And Ron has talked about competition, and that's why you've seen a lot of these minimal deals, these 1-2 year deals for not a lot of money, because guys are getting an opportunity to come in and compete. Nothing's being guaranteed. No one is being assured of anything. You're just getting a chance to come in and compete. And so these UDFAs would have had an opportunity, a real chance to make this football team if these were normal times. But because of the fact that we're in this pandemic and there is no OTAs, there will be no mini camps, and it's strictly going to be training camp, and that may even be abbreviated, it's going to be tough for a lot of these UDFAs to have a legitimate shot at cracking this roster. That being said, one guy in particular looks like he's going to have a legitimate shot and not only cracking the roster, but maybe even being a starter on this team. Maybe not right out of the gate, but down the road, if he's talented enough, if his talents shine through, he may ultimately be the Redskins TE1 before the season's done. But he's got to make the football team first. But that being said, there are two in particular that I want to talk about in terms of undrafted free agents because I had already done the work on them. So I said, hey, it's not a big deal. No skin off my back. I've already done the work. Why not go ahead and introduce these players to the Redskins fans and tell them what they can look forward to with these two guys in particular? Now, one I don't think is going to make this football team, but he's still an interesting and intriguing prospect. The other is a guy that I think has every opportunity to not only make this roster, but make an impact. So let's talk about the guy first that I think has a legitimate shot and not only making his football team, but actually having an impact, and that is Thaddeus Moss, tight end out of LSU. Now, I tried to warn you guys early in the draft process, and as we worked our way through the draft process, when we talked tight ends on the Draft 101 live program, as we talked about the tight end position during the draft, I told you guys, don't get fixated on Thaddeus Moss because he's not viewed in league circles like a lot of you out there view him, okay? Because his last name is Moss, doesn't mean that this guy is going to automatically get an opportunity. Doesn't mean that this guy is uber athletic and he's this and he's that. You got to look at him and what he is and kind of put that in its proper perspective. And I think a lot of you lost sight of that because LSU was so dominant And when you got to see Thaddeus Moss, he was making plays, and you're thinking to yourself, this guy is awesome. We need to get Thaddeus Moss. And some of you wanted to spend a 3rd-round pick on him. I'm like, oh, whoa. This guy, if he gets drafted, and he should have been. I'm going to be honest with you. He should have been drafted, okay? Now, I didn't think he was going to get drafted any sooner than the 5th round. I thought that's when you're going to start to see a guy like Thaddeus Moss be considered 5th, 6th, 7th, somewhere in there. He'd get drafted. I did not think for 1 second that he would be a UDFA. I did not see this coming. So I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you that I was telling you guys he wasn't going to get drafted, because that wasn't what I was saying. But I did think he was a guy that you would get later on in the draft. There are reasons as to that, and I'm going to explain them here. But make no mistake about it, he should have been drafted. He's talented enough to play in this league. And the question is he good enough to start? Or is he just a guy that is a part of your tight end mix? We're going to find that out over the next maybe year or two. But one thing's for sure, I'm glad he's here in Washington and going to have an opportunity to compete amongst the tight ends that we have. So Thaddeus Moss, 6'2", 250 pounds, 32-inch arms. 4.74 to 4.82 is the range in which I put his 40. He did not run a 40 at the combine, which I found a little interesting. I knew what he was doing. He was hiding, okay? But he couldn't have known that the Rona was going to actually ravage the country the way that it did, and essentially put everything on lockdown, and he wasn't going to get to run a 40 at all. But if he were confident in his abilities, he would have went out there and he would have competed. And he threw out some bogus excuse as to why he wasn't competing, something like fatigue or something like that. Whatever the case may be, he didn't perform at the combine. That's fine. I didn't have a problem with it. But I felt like I knew why. So you go to his season stats, and this is where you really need to pay attention, because a lot of you probably didn't know this because you were so fixated on what he did in 2019 that you didn't know the background story behind Thaddeus Moss. But 47 catches, 570 yards, and 4 touchdowns in 14 games. Those are really good numbers, all right? Now, his career stats should be sounding off alarms for you. If I just told you he had 47 catches for 570 yards and 4 touchdowns this past season in 2019, then his career stats should be a little bit alarming. 53 catches for 619 yards and 5 touchdowns in just 27 games. So what I'm essentially telling you is there's only one more season of body of work here with Thaddeus Moss. Why is that for a guy that is a redshirt junior? We'll get to that a little bit later on. Anyhow, my grade for him was either a 4th or 5th round selection. I thought he would be a 5th round more so than a 4th, but somewhere in day 3, okay? Early to mid day 3 is what I thought he was going to amount to somewhere. He was my 10th tight end on the board. So again, I had a number of guys ahead of him in terms of tight ends in this draft. And my player comp for him was Algernon Crumpler. Most of you know him as Algie Crumpler, who used to play with the Atlanta Falcons once upon a time when there was the Michael Vick experience in Atlanta with the Falcons. And a really damn good tight end at that. You know, kind of short, stocky, but athletically gifted enough to separate from DBs and linebackers and make plays. And that's kind of what I see with with Thaddeus Moss. So his strengths, he's got a thick build. You know, at 6'2", 250, he's like sort of like a fire hydrant of, kind of thick, stout. And that's the kind of build that he has. Outstanding hands. To me, he had the best set of hands of any tight end in this draft. You know, him and Colby Parkinson out of Stanford were two of the more short-handed tight ends in this draft. And you could throw Cole Kmet in there too. Not a lot of drops with Cole Kmet, but Thaddeus Moss, sticky hands. We all remember the catch versus Alabama on the sidelines where he barely kept his feet in bounds and somehow stretched his arms out 4 yards out of bounds and made a catch. There were plenty of those. There was a big catch in the national championship game. Didn't count versus Clemson, but he goes up, climbs the ladder, snatches the football down. He's got great hands. So that's not something I worry about with him. He's got good body control. I just talked about that catch versus Alabama where he's got his feet in bounds barely, but still able to stretch over the out of bounds line and pluck the football out of the air. I still don't know how he caught that football, kept his feet in bounds. There's the catch I just alluded to versus Clemson where he dives in the air and catches the football on a ridiculous scramble drill throw by Joe Burrow, and he goes up and gets that. He's got great body control. That's another thing that I like about him. Catching traffic. When you don't separate very good, which he doesn't, he's not a big winner, you got to be able to catch it in traffic. He can. So that's another thing you got to like about him. He uses his body to shield defenders well. He boxes out is essentially what he does. And again, as I just alluded to, when you're not separating, when you're not a big winner, you better be able to use your body when you're 6'2", 250. You better be able to use that wide frame of yours to box and shield out defenders away from the football. And he can't. Physical presence in the run game. Now, this is the thing that I was wrong about going into the process when talking Thaddeus Moss. I was one of these people that weren't quite sure that he was as good a blocker as he was touting himself to be, because I said, look, this guy played at LSU. They had him split out 70% of the time, and the other 30 when he was actually blocking, it wasn't really that much going on there. He can't be that much of a blocker. They were in 5 wide receiver sets most of the time. They were spreading it out and letting Joe Burrow dissect defenses. So I never thought that he was going to be a real legitimate threat in the run game as a blocker. I was wrong. This guy blocks. And so when I put on the tape, I was pleasantly surprised at how well he acclimated himself in the running game. He was a guy that was one of the more efficient blockers in this entire draft, to be honest with you. Not many of the tight ends in this year's crop were actually adept at blocking. He was one of the few. So that's something that I actually really like about Thaddeus Moss. He runs really good routes. Look, they're not quick, they're not fast, but they're efficient, and he's good at running routes. So that is something he does well, but again, not overly athletic. So if those routes aren't sharp, if they're not crisp, he's not going to get himself open. But he runs one hell of a whip route, and that's actually pretty impressive for a guy his size at 250 pounds. You're not used to seeing guys be able to snap it, go outside, snap it back inside, and separate. But he was able to do that and other things with great regularity. So he does run some good routes. And then obviously, NFL bloodlines, his dad, Hall of Fame wide receiver, Randy Moss. And so that is coursing through his veins. And so there is a little bit of that as well. But you get to his weaknesses. Speed, definitely a weakness. And as I gave you my projected times, I can't nail it down precisely, but 4.74 to 4.82. I think he's more on the 8.2 side, 4.82 side than he is the 4.74. If he's at 4.74, he's right in the mix with all the rest of the tight ends that were drafted this year. Now, if he's closer to 4.82, now you're getting into that danger zone where you're like, hey, man, you're just a blocking tight end. We really can't do much with you in the pass game. But still, bottom line is, whatever his speed is, and we'll probably never know at this point, he's not fast, period. That's end of discussion. His height and size, not desirable for the tight end position. Generally, you want your tight end to be anywhere north of 6'3". Really, 6'4", 6'5" is the neighborhood that you really want to be living in as a tight end. But look, if you're 6'2", you're 6'3", that's fine too if you have a trait that sticks out. He doesn't necessarily have that outside of really good hands. So that's something that teams were probably turned off by as well. Injury concerns. I talked about the career stat number and versus his season stats and how that should be alarming to you. That was the first thing when I started doing my homework on Thaddeus Moss. That was the first thing that jumped out at me was, hey, bruh, why do you only have 6 catches and, 30 and 49 other yards and 1 score the rest of your career? What happened? All right. And so you've got injuries and you've got a guy that transferred. So let's get into that right now. And I want to couple some of these. Matter of fact, let's get through the rest of his weaknesses because they all kind of tie into one another. So injury concerns is one. We'll get to that in a second. Limited productivity. Okay, I just talked about the fact that he doesn't have a ton of productivity. Outside of what he just did in 2019, there's not a lot there. And then his lack of experience at the tight end position. So here's a guy that sat out 2017 after he transferred from NC State. So he went initially to NC State. He grew up in North Carolina, and he ultimately wanted to go to NC State. So he went there in 2016, and then he had to sit out all of 2017 because he decided, I don't really want to go to NC State anymore. And so maybe a coach got fired. That's generally how it goes. The guy that recruited you gets fired, or he leaves to go take another job, and all of a sudden next coaching staff comes in. You don't want any part of that new staff. That's not why you came there. So you transfer. So he had to sit out all of 2017. So then, after finally getting himself ready to go in 2018, he misses all of 2018 with a foot injury, which requires 2 surgeries. Not one, but 2 surgeries. So he misses 2 straight seasons. Had to sit out 2017 because of transferring rules. Had to sit out all of 2018 because he was injured with a foot injury that required 2 surgeries. And then he finally plays in 2019. He blows up. Really, in that LSU season, he was just a part of the mix. He wasn't the reason they were having success. He was a part of the reason they were having success. And so he kind of felt like everybody's leaving. I'm just going to go too. I don't think there was anything really for him to gain by going back to school, because he wasn't going to get any faster, more likely than not. They weren't going to be as good next year without Joe Burrow, who moved on to the NFL. And I don't think they were going to replicate what they did this past year with a new quarterback coming in there. So he probably thought to himself, my stock isn't going to be any as high as it is now. It's not going to get any higher than it is right now. So I'm going to go ahead and go. But the problem is his stock wasn't that high to begin with, at least not with people in the scouting community. With fans out there, everybody, oh my God, this guy is awesome. It's Randy Moss's son. You got to get this guy. He's an excellent tight end. Well, there's some questions about that. So what I'm telling you is, I'm glad the Redskins got him as a UDFA. I thought he was worthy of a draft pick. But the fact of the matter is, this is a guy that is going to get a chance to come in and compete. He's probably better than anything we have on the roster right now, which isn't saying much, okay? We don't have anybody that stands out at the tight end position, which is why he's going to have a legitimate shot, not only to make the roster, but to have an impact early on in his career. But let me make this be known. There were Redskins fans, one in particular that he drives me nuts on Twitter, that, was like, oh, this draft was a C minus. And then when we got Thad Moss as a UDFA, oh, now it's a B plus. Are you kidding me? Thad Moss's presence as a UDFA doesn't make this draft a whole grade and a half letter better. Are you crazy? So again, sometimes anyway, I like my breath. Sometimes it can be hot, but I like my breath. And because I like my breath so much, I don't like wasting it. So I'm not going to try to explain some of these concepts that I've done over and over with you guys about where guys are drafting for need and drafting for best player available. I'm done with that. But I got another guy that I want to talk about that the Redskins signed as a UDFA, and that's Steven Montez. And we're going to do this quickly because I don't think he's going to make the football team, but he's an intriguing prospect nonetheless. Quarterback Steven Montez out of Colorado, 6'4", 231 pounds. He's an athlete, ran a 4.68 at the combine. This is a guy that threw for over 2,800 yards his senior year, 63% completion percentage, 17 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. He also rushed 65 times for 153 yards and 3 scores. In his career, he was a 63% completion percentage guy. So that kind of was something that traveled with him, which is not that bad. It's not that great either, kind of in the middle. 8,632 yards for his career in 36 games, 54 touchdowns, 28 interceptions, 291 rushes for 729 yards and 10 scores. I had him as my 8th rated quarterback in this year's draft. As you know, generally speaking, only 7 to 9 quarterbacks usually get drafted. 9 went in this year's draft. He was not one of them. Obviously, that's why he's a UDFA. I had him as a mid to late day 3 quarterback. He's a developmental project, was always going to be that if you were going to select him. Obviously, no team felt like he was worthy of a selection. My player comp for him, I've got 2. You could look at him as a Josh Freeman type, the ex-first round pick out of K-State that was drafted by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Or you could look at him as Jay Cutler. Either way, it's not good enough. His strengths, big, strapping NFL quarterback frame. All right, at 6'4", 230, he's huge. And that's what you're looking for at the quarterback position. He's 30, he's sturdy, he's physical. He's a guy that's built for the rigors of the NFL game. He's got a rope, a hose for an arm. I mean, his arm is extremely live. And so those things get you excited about him. Adequate mobility. I talked about the 4.68 40. He can move around. He can definitely help himself in and outside of the pocket. You can run boots with him. You can move the pocket with him. He can get out of trouble. He can get out of dodge. He can use his legs to extend plays and even pick up yardage when necessary. Throws well on the move. He's a guy that can throw some darts and some BBs and some dimes on the move. Again, when you have a live arm like he does, not hard to flick the wrist and get the football to go where you want it to go if you can throw it accurately. Unafraid of making a mistake. That's my nice way of saying he's a gunslinger. He's willing to try to fit the ball into some tight windows that it probably shouldn't go, but because he has a strong arm, he really has confidence in his arm, and so he trusts his arm sometimes more than he should. And I think he trusts his arm more than he trusts his eyes. And his eyes are probably telling him, you shouldn't throw this. And his arm is like, bro, we can fit it in there. And so he's unafraid of making a mistake, which means he'll make some risky throws. Sometimes they pay off. Most times they don't. Plenty of experience. This was a 3-year starter at Colorado, which is a good thing. And then it's a bad thing. And we'll talk about why it's a bad thing here in a second. Let's get to his weaknesses. Wildly inconsistent. That's the thing that drives you nuts with this guy. You want to be excited about a 6'4", 230-pound quarterback with athleticism and a big arm, but he doesn't put it together. And again, that same guy that I told you drives me nuts on Twitter was talking about Steven Montez and how he's going to have a chance to come in and unseat Kyle Allen for the second quarterback spot, which is insane, okay? 1, we traded for Kyle Allen. 2, he knows the system and they're comfortable with him. And 3, Steven Montez is a project. Okay, a guy that drives you absolutely nuts with his decision-making and the things that he does with the football. And he tried to tell me, well, he was behind a bad offensive line and he didn't have any talent around him. The man played with 2 NFL wide receivers. Javon Winfrey got drafted last year by the Denver Broncos. And by the way, Laviska Shenault Jr. was there this year. So over the span of his 3 years as a starter, 2 of those years, he had an NFL receiver, 2 NFL receivers starting for him 2 of those years. So miss me with the lack of talent out there. He had guys around him that could play. And by the way, Phillip Lindsay was in that backfield too. So there was talent on that Colorado roster with him. He just wasn't consistent. Poor throwing platform. He's got an inconsistent base. His feet are all over the place. It's part of the reason the ball isn't accurate consistently is because he's throwing from different platforms. He's fading away. His feet are all over the place. And so the ball sails, or he's skipping throws when you know his arm's strong enough because his feet aren't set and he doesn't have a consistent base. You get these kind of mistakes. His decision-making is just awful, okay? It wanes under duress too. It gets worse when he's under pressure. He panics. He's one of these guys that you look at and say, you're capable of throwing a left-hand interception. And he will try to do some crazy things with the football to get himself out of trouble. And it's just not becoming of an NFL quarterback. And then this is the last thing. He misses too many downfield throws. For a guy with a big arm, the only way to take advantage of having a big arm is to be able to hit the deep shot. And he just misses too many opportunities. And I talk about this all the time in the NFL. The separation between average and good and great is the ability to hit the deep ball, to take advantage of opportunities when they come. If you can't hit the deep ball consistently, you'll never fully be able to take advantage of all of your talents, especially when one of your biggest talents is your arm talent. And if you're not hitting guys down the field, that's a big problem. So Steven Montez is interesting. He's got everything you're looking for, but at the end of the day, he is way too inconsistent to have a shot to be a starter in this league. Now, he may be able to be a credible backup for someone, but it won't be here. I don't see the Redskins carrying 3 quarterbacks. They could, and if they decide to, he'd be the perfect guy to be the third option and continue to learn and grow. But if they're going with 2 quarterbacks, he'd be a perfect candidate for the practice squad. That's where I envision him being, someone that they hang on to for the short term. And because Kyle Allen isn't under contract for more than a year. I think he signed a 1-year deal in Carolina. So theoretically, he could be gone next year. And a guy like Steven Montez may be able to step in as a backup. He's got the same kind of build as Dwayne. So from that standpoint, it'll be interesting to see if he develops here and if they like him enough to keep him. I don't think he will last here, but that's another interesting name to consider as a UDFA. So those are my quick breakdowns of Thaddeus Moss and Steven Montez. Thank you for joining me. Remember, I am a Redskins fan etched in burgundy and gold. My Redskins spirit will never die. Redskins spirit will never fold. Until we meet again, Hail to our beloved Washington Redskins. I want to give you a quick program update. So Tuesday, I am going to release my 2020 Redskins draft breakdown, where I break down every single pick. Honestly, I've already broken down the first 4 selections. I'll just have to break down the final 4. So look forward to that. At some point this week, look for the Antonio Gibson breakdown on IG. I think I'm going to go ahead and do that. And Thursday will be on live. Redskins Report live on Thursday, 8:30 p. We'll break down everything. We'll talk about everything, including the Redskins picking up Jonathan Allen's 5th-year option. So he is definitely in the plans of this organization, or at least they want to see more from Jonathan Allen. That was a no-brainer. Pick up the 5th-year option and continue to see him grow and decide if you want to give him the long-term deal or not to keep him in Washington. So a lot of things on the table. We'll talk about this draft. We'll talk about everything on the table on Thursday, and look forward to doing that with you guys then. Until then, you guys take care, stay safe, like this video, subscribe to the Louie T Network if you haven't already done so, and make sure you're following me on IG, Louie T Network _ on Twitter at Louie T Network. Until then, you guys take care. Have a good one.